Savvy Central Radio's official sponsor for our third annual Aviation Month is Winty Aviation T-Shirt Art. Winty is an aviation-themed t-shirt business designing and printing aviation-related graphics for pilots, aviation businesses, and aviation enthusiasts worldwide. Winty can print 1 or 100 garments upon request within a reasonably low turnaround time, including a one-stop shop solution for all your graphic art needs, from logos, business cards, book covers, and banners. Contact winty.com today in order to find out how your design could become a reality. Get ready and start your engines for our third annual Aviation Month on Savvy Central Radio, where 8 aviation businesses share their knowledge and wisdom. Today we have return guest Karlene Petitt, international airline pilot, author, and speaker. Karlene is a 35-year veteran of flying and now flies an Airbus for an international airline. She is currently working in a doctorate program at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, working towards her PhD in aviation. Her writing career began with designing and authoring training programs for major airlines. Karlene is also the author of 2 exciting aviation thrillers, Flight for Control and Flight for Safety, and is presently working on her next release, Flight for Success. Today we'll talk about the current changes in the field of commercial aviation and how we can increase safety in this industry. To find out more about Karlene, visit Karlene Petitt, Petitt.com. Hey Karlene, welcome back to Savvy Central Radio for our third annual Aviation Month. How are you?
I'm doing great, Christina. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you can come on back. You've been back twice, or you've been on Savvy twice, talking about your best-selling thrillers, your aviation thrillers, Flight for Control and Flight for Safety. And today we're going to focus on the complexities of commercial aviation industry, what's working, what's not, and how can we make it safer.
That sounds like a great conversation.
Yeah, and you're the perfect person to have it. And for everyone out there who might have not tuned into the first 2 shows, give them a little tidbit into your past, what you're all about, so they know a little bit about your background.
Okay, well, that could be a show in itself with my crazy life. I am on my 8th airline. I've got type ratings on all the heavy Boeing 72, 73, 756, 747, 400, 200, and I now fly the A330. And I am also a mother of 3 grown daughters and have 7 grandkids, and I have always worked in training for all my airlines. I've got a passion for teaching and a passion for safety, and I've gone from old school aircraft to new school, and you know, I want to make a change, and in this aviation world it's really hard to do that. And so my new mission is, I thought I better educate myself. So I just started in September with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and I am getting my PhD in aviation with a focus on safety. So that, in addition to writing novels, and I kind of have a method to my madness with my novels, because I'm taking real industry events, real industry issues, real crashes, real behind-the-scenes things, and I'm creating these fictional novels that we can bring the general public into kind of a thrilling mystery type environment of what's happening in the aviation world, specifically the airline world. And at the end of the day, when I finish my PhD, we will see a nonfiction book. So the Flight series, which I'm calling the Flight series, Flight for Control as the first, Flight for Safety the second, Flight for Survival will be coming out soon. At the end of the day, I'm going to have Fight for Safety, the truth behind the Flight series. So for all of those readers, and I love reading the comments on Amazon who wonder, ooh, what part of these are true? Well, one day we'll see the truth, and it'll occur after I finish my PhD. So we'll have a little credibility behind it, because I kind of think that's the only way we're going to be able to create change.
Yeah, I can totally see where you're coming from. And the aviation industry is amazing. We've gone great feats to coming in just a little over 100 years to where we are today with aviation. But what I tend to notice is that the industry on a whole is more reactive to safety versus being proactive. And why do you think this is so?
Well, it goes back to that old theory. You know, a lot of people say, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah.
And, and I like to vision picture this sandy beach and take a stick and run it a line down this, through the sand. And you can we'll call that line safe. Okay, and right now you could be right walking that line on the safe side and you're considered safe. And so unless you step over the line, they're not going to fix it, because it costs money. It costs a lot of money. We can all use more training, but really, when is enough enough? Sometimes more doesn't necessarily mean better, but it's really about the numbers. It's a quantitative thing, and it's a bean counter thing, and it's like, okay, if you can't prove to me that this is wrong, we are not going to spend the money to fix it. And that's what happens is they wait until the industry waits until the accident occurs, and when it occurs, and they say, oh, okay, we'll fix it. And it's just very difficult for anyone to come in and say, I can foresee this occurring. Let's go spend $1 million and fix it. They're just not going to do it. They just won't. And sadly, that's the case. But our goal, safety goal, should be try and always move away from that safe line. Away from it as far as we can, away from the unsafe side of that. So we can just keep getting safer and safer and safer, and then we have a margin of error in there, for mistakes that might happen, might not. And like sadly, Air France, and I'm going to bring that up 447 because I've just actually been reviewing the transcripts and the video for my human factors course, and the sad thing about that is, all the aircraft and all airlines who are flying with that pitot system, there had been numerous incidents exactly what transpired with Air France as far as the clogged iced pitot tube and instruments disappearing. Exactly the same. And the industry knew it, but there had never been a problem with it. We all, pilots flying, it occurred, and we, dealt with it, and then the instruments came back and everything was fine. And so they never did anything with it, but they knew it was there. Okay, not until the crash of Air France 447. Now we have a crash, and they said, okay, now we have to invest the money and have this pitot tubes changed.
I'm curious, Karlene. Now you say it had happened prior, like they knew it was happening. Pilots dealt with it. Why in this particular case did they not be able to deal with it and get on the ground safely?
And that's a big question, but it could be experience level. It could, there are a lot of attributing factors. Fatigue, huge fatigue level was one of them. Their particular aircraft, it hit them unexpectedly. They didn't know. They went into a storm that was never anticipated at the altitude that they were at. The reaction of the pilot flying, pulling that stick back, we cannot go into his mind and know why he did that. Initially, in my thought, I'm thinking he learned that the Airbus can't stall, which it can't unless it's in alternate law. In normal law, it can't stall, but alternate law, it can. Was he thinking that? From an aircraft manufacturer, there's no feedback. In a typical airplane, your aircraft, you pull your control back, and your co-pilot comes back with it. They're connected. Well, the pilot in the left seat has no indication that the pilot in the right seat was pulling that stick back, and so that was, so there, you call it the perfect storm. There were so many causal factors into this. Bottom line, what was he thinking? Had these pilots in this automated airplane, it has such a stable platform. Had they left their hands off and done nothing, the airplane would have flown through that storm. Which is really, it's sad, but it's just like, and why did he do that? And the core comes back to training, because a lot of blame goes on pilots, for errors and human error and why they didn't do something. But the bottom line is, if you only know what you know, and if you were trained, it's like, if I was trained and somebody taught me ABC and that's all they ever taught me, then how am I supposed to know when Z pops up that I have to deal with it and how to do it? Because I only know what I know. And the whole core goes back to training properly, training our pilots correctly, getting that core foundation of understanding their aircraft. Because while we blame he didn't know how to fly an airplane, really what he didn't know is he didn't understand his airplane, what was going on, what happened, and how to get through it. And had he understood all that, he wouldn't have reacted and attempted to do something this airplane shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah. Well, I've heard of people getting into accidents over fear, like getting close to the ground, you're about to crash and you pull back and you're stalling, you're going into a secondary stall. Why would an experienced pilot do that? Sometimes with thousands and thousands of hours. And we talked about this earlier, the human factor of overload. Like, you know, you're in the cockpit, bells and whistles going off, and all this crap is happening at once, and you're like, your brain shuts down, and you do something that ordinarily you probably wouldn't do in flight. But right now, your brain is so overloaded that you are doing something that you, in ordinary circumstances, you would not be doing.
Oh, you know what? There's a fabulous book that I think everyone should read. It's called Deep Survival, Why Some Live, Why Some Die. And the author actually went in and did 30 years of research on this, because they've had Navy pilots who have hit ships when everyone's telling them to break away, you're not there. And it's like, why do they continue? Why do they press on? And those times when we say, what were they thinking? The answer is they weren't, because when that fear response comes in, it blocks out that cognitive ability to think. And so it's like the rabbit in the headlight. You know, it's they sit there and they stare at it, and this fear, they can't get out of the way. And that it really does happen to people. They're like, and another reason is they're like, they want to get on the ground. They've been on the ground so many times, and they know that they can do this because they've done it before. And when the environment, you know, they may have gone from landing in this heavy crosswind, landing in this heavy crosswind, landing in this heavy crosswind, and all of a sudden the environment changes. But in their mind, their comfort zone is on the ground. And so they know, their body knows, if I get on the ground, I'm going to be okay. And I've got on the ground before, and I can do it again. And so a lot of times pilots or people will put themselves into, press on in a condition, in an environment they shouldn't be going to, because their body, because they normally have done it before and it's been okay. You know, a good example is why, when you hear about guys on mountains, why the expert climbers are the ones that just fell off the mountain, or the expert, river guides are the ones that drowned. It's because they're the experts and they've been there, done it before, they can do it again. And everybody else who's not an expert is very cautious and fearful of the changing environment, because this is not a normal environment. But there's something to do with people who are experts have that I know it's like it's ingrained. They've done it before, they can do it again. The problem is when the environment changes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating book. And back to the comment, why were they doing what they did? Yeah. Because they just weren't thinking. They couldn't. They were in that overload. They were in that fear state that their logic portion of their brain no longer thinks. No. It is completely disconnected. Got you.
I totally could relate. I've been in a flight class very early on where I was doing some crosswind landings, and I froze up. I got scared coming in, and I just stepped really hard on the wrong rudder and almost turned the plane upside down. And my teacher said, "Get off the rudder!" And I was frozen. Like he had to practically put his whole entire weight on the opposite rudder to get the plane not to do roll over. And he said to me, "Don't ever do that again. Next time I'm punching you."
Think about drowning victims. You know what? They're going to try and they'll take you down. It's that fear, that grab. Even though they can't logically, if somebody were drowning, they could logically know that this person is here to save me, just relax. They're going to put their arms around me and they're going to drag me in. But they don't do that. Their thought process, if they were on the beach, dry, they'd go, yeah, if you're going to save me, sure, I'd relax and you can come pull me in. No, they don't do that. They panic and they start clawing and grabbing, and a lot of times those people who are drowning will drown the person trying to save them with them. Which is totally an illogical thing. You think you'd think this through, but it's that fear and that changes how we think. So the key is really to get a really solid foundation of basic flying skills, a really solid foundation of how our aircraft operate. So we don't have to be thinking about that stuff, So when we get in that mode of overload, hopefully we're not overloaded from operational perspective. We have time to think about what's happening in the changing environment.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit about this before we started our interview about how simulators can be actually a great help to flight training, and it was a big help for me. I mean, I started out 20 hours at home on my flight simulator, just the Microsoft one, with Rob Machado helped me out there, and I had no pilot friends, so it was just Rod and me and my computer, and I stepped into the first flight, and my teacher said, wow, it's like you've had at least 10 hours of real flight training in an actual airplane. When I stepped in there, he's like, he didn't have to show me to use rudder. You were one of the few students he took me up. He said, you were actually using your rudder. Do you feel simulators can be actually a great help all areas of flight training in the aviation industry, even in commercial flying as well?
Absolutely, and we've been training in simulators since we have level D simulators which replicate the aircraft. The first time a 747 captain might fly his airplane is with passengers because he's completely trained in a simulator. And the study I was telling you about earlier, what's fascinating is now they're showing, and this was an FAA study, that actually non-motion provides better training than motion. And so to get better training, we could almost be taking a lot of that motion, full flight motion simulator, put them in a fixed, what they call a fixed space simulator, and get better quality training because you can learn better without that motion. But yeah, that especially the aircraft operating today, it's we're managing. It's no longer a cockpit; it's a flight deck, and a lot of it is managing the systems, managing the operation, understanding, what mode of flight you're in, and yeah, a lot of that can be trained in a simulator.
Yeah, and we were mentioning also that the fact that it's system overload, like even I was saying early on in my training, if I would go up and start learning a new maneuver and I've not done it and he's trying to teach me in the actual aircraft, I would be on system overload sometimes in my brain, and I would learn better with some ground training or in a simulator first before I went up and actually did it in something moving and had to worry about that as well.
Exactly, and if you ever had known anyone who's flown say one of the older Boeings, like a 727 or 747 round dial type aircraft, and now they're going to go fly in the glass with an electronic map. And I say that it's like most of the general aviation planes are going that way anyway. But there's a lot of data on our maps, and they're moving maps, and so we've got waypoints and arrows and stars, and there's like different colors for things, and there's all this information. Well, your brain's got to pick all that up and understand what it all means, and it's such a different complexity in training today than it ever was before. It's so much easier. When we were training 757 pilots initially, the challenge was to get them to use the automation, because you could see the moment they started feeling overload, click, everything's going off, I'm going to fly my airplane. And it's like, okay, we know you know how to fly. We have to teach you how to manage this and manage the systems and get the airplane to do what you want it to do. So we've completely transitioned from that to now we're at these automated airplanes where we're trying to tell the pilots, go ahead and kick it off and fly it. And they won't, because they're like so comfortable with the automation and the management. I'm really torn. It's kind of like I'm on this fence, because I'm one school, total experience. We need experience for flying these airplanes, and now I'm shifting over, and we need to hand fly them. But then some of me thinks, what? The change in our industry and the change of our aircraft, they're not the same airplanes that we used to fly. At all. They just aren't. We don't even trim the A330. It does it itself. So they're completely different airplanes. We're managing them different. We're operating them in a totally different environment than we used to. So should we really be kicking off that autopilot, when you're on the backside of the clock and it's 4 o'clock in the morning your time and you've been up all night flying and you've got 300 people on board and you're fatigued? Now, could the pilots kick it off and hand fly their airplane? Yes, that's the easy part. The overload and the breakdown in the safety comes with when you do that. Now you've just compounded the tasks on your co-pilot, and you've taken away some of the safety backups. Because what happens when I'm flying my airplane now, my co-pilot is fatigued, coming in, backside the clock. Now we're talking to foreign controller, so there's going to be a strong accent issue with getting communications. Now I'm focusing on flying, trying to half listen and focus on this aircraft. And so he's, typing in, punching in the frequency. I'm supposed to be backing it up, but am I really backing it up? And then they give us a runway change. So he's programming the computer, which I'm supposed to be backing up, but I can't really back it up as well because I'm hand flying. And so it really puts an overload on the pilot not flying, and it reduces your ability to safety cross-check each other. So hand flying is not the issue so much as the entire operation of somebody hand flying is you're opening it up to errors. And so
I mean, that's the whole reason automation came to exist in all airplanes, even in the smaller airplanes, so that we could cut down on errors. But then the conundrum is, how do you keep people being proficient in actual flying the aircraft machine if the systems go null and void at any time, if something should happen to them?
Exactly. And here's the thing. 20 some years ago, the FAA, when we were coming into this new age back then with the 757, and we had to, the check ride completely was on the autopilot. And I had told the FAA examiner, I said, you know what, we should be checking pilots to see if they know how to fly. And he laughed at me and said, no, this is a new world. The reliability is so high, they're not going to break. Well, we do know they break. However, with that said, the advancement of the aircraft now, there is redundancy after redundancy. So we're getting to the point in the equipment that when something breaks, it's going to be very difficult for 2 flight directors, 2 autopilots, 2 auto thrust systems to all decide that they're going to tank at once. You know what I mean? It's probably not going to happen. Now, Air France was a perfect example. However, where they had to do it, but they didn't have to do it. The airplane is designed, they could have left hands off and they didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to fly that airplane. They just had to wait till their instruments came back and re-engage the equipment. So they didn't really have to hand fly it. Asiana crashed. Had the automation been on, he wouldn't have crashed. They were disconnected somewhere. They didn't have, once again, back to training. He didn't have a proper visual of what that was doing. They didn't have a proper scan to know that he wasn't disconnected. They weren't aware of what was happening in the aircraft. And, that goes back to core training.
Yeah, and it's going to happen to anyone at any time.
And there goes back to that core training. You get this what they call rote memory, and sometimes you miss things because you get distracted or something. So it's like learn the airplane, get a solid foundation of what you're doing, so you know what you're doing, and then follow up with checklists. Because I'll tell you, checklists will catch everyone making a mistake. If people are going to miss things, they're just going to, somebody's going to interrupt you, especially on the commercial operators, because of course something right in the middle of a checklist, somebody's going to come in and say, flight attendant say, hey, we've got a dog in the cargo compartment, or so, fueler's going to come in, here's your fuel slip. There's so many interruptions in the middle of preparation. It just comes down to good, solid habit patterns, and a habit pattern being, if you get broken in the middle of what you're doing, start over, or if you get broken in the middle of a checklist, put your thumb on that item and don't move it until you pick it back, till you start it again. And that can go general aviation and commercial aviation, and everybody can develop their own habit patterns to keep themselves safe and
their own checklists if needed.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we've talked in past shows of some of the working conditions that commercial pilots have to, go through on a daily basis that we take for granted, like super long days, 17 hours or more long days. Now, I've also heard of regional flying, which is basically flying in domestic flights. Is there a difference between the working conditions of regional pilots as opposed to commercial pilots?
Yeah, and regional pilots are commercial pilots. Commuter flight, that's what we're thinking. Commuters is what we're looking at. Yeah, those regional flights those guys put in long hours. And sometimes they put in long hours, many takeoffs and landings. Other times they put in very long days and they do a short hop, like 30 minutes. We all get paid per hour.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I'm flying a 14-hour flight, I'll get paid 14 hours. Okay, so it's very efficient. Now, granted, I have to go sit on the ground for 36 hours somewhere, and whatever whatever airline you work for, in the contract they negotiate, you get some compensation for that. But it's not your hourly flight rate. But think about a regional pilot who gets paid, a fraction of what the mainline pilots get. And they put in a 14-hour day, but they take off and they fly a 30-minute commuter hop, and they sit for 4 hours. And then they fly 30 minutes back. And then they sit for 5 hours, and then they do 20 minutes here. Some of these pilots are getting paid after a 14-hour day, might get 3 hours of flight time, and that's it. And that's what they get paid for, and which is
nuts.
It is.
Wow.
And the sad thing is, it should have been, it would have been nice. With this pending pilot shortage, you get into the commuter because you're going, I'm paying my dues, I'm getting in here, I'm going to get my experience, and then I can flow up to the mainline airline. The problem is the mainline airlines now own and operate these commuters. And it's not cost effective for a mainline airline to take a pilot from its own airline. Now they've got to go replace that person, kind of thing. And, so I don't know. This industry's kind of goofed up on how to do this. I know we were talking a little bit about this ab initio situation, taking pilots. When we do go into full pilot shortage mode, meaning that now all the mainline airlines have sucked up all the, commuter pilots. Hopefully it'll flow that way. Hopefully those guys who are paying their dues and working under crazy conditions in the regionals will have the opportunity to come up and fly for the main line, or somebody will step in, our unions will step in and get them pay and work rules that, are justified for the amount of work they're doing. I hope that's what we really need to see happen, because these guys are working long hours and far more challenging flights than I'll ever fly. They're flying in the weather. They're flying in and out of the mountainous terrain. They're going into short field airports. They're doing, just very high risk type flying in the little airplane, in a smaller aircraft that doesn't have the support system necessarily that I do, that I take off, fly to China, and go in and land. We're fatigued because physical fatigue. We've been up a long time. These, the challenges with the regionals, not only do they have physical fatigue if they put on long hours, but they've got a higher mental fatigue of the continuous cycles and the, especially we're coming into the winter months where the weather's going to be bad. They're going to be going from de-icing at one airport to flying through snowstorms and de-icing at another. And, these poor guys and gals are living on basically probably less than minimum wage when it all comes down to how many hours they're working.
Wow, and that's something really important to touch on, because how effective can you be as your best pilot, regardless of whatever skills, how many hours you have under your belt, if you not only are not getting good sleep, but you're worried about paying your bills because you're getting paid nothing, and you haven't eaten properly because you're probably living off of machine food, and you could barely afford that.
I know, and that is actually the reality of what's going on with many of the commuter pilots. Unless you actually live in base and have a spouse that helps pick up, helps bring in a wage. If you're single and have to pay for housing, or you're married and have to commute somewhere and still get housing where you're at, it's a challenge. It's a financial challenge. And you're right, the stress. It's like, well, you read Flight for Control. Basically, it was kind of how far can you break an industry before the pilots break? There's a breaking point. And what we don't take into account for is mental health. And the thing is, with pilots, we are so, we can do anything. Of course we can. We're very competent, confident, and very type A personalities, which is good. But on the bad side, it's very difficult for a pilot to self-diagnose when the stress is overloading. And, the worry about putting the kids through college, the worry about putting food on your table, worry about making ends meet, and no hope that you're going to get out of that rut. It's a huge, and it does impact. If you look at certain incidents of, let's take the Northwest flight, the pilots, that was kind of, that were purported to fly over Minneapolis and miss the airport. They really didn't miss the airport. That's a whole nother story. And they were using the computers. Yeah. But it could have been anything. Really what was going on in that cockpit, and really what happened with the missed radio calls and the whole chain of events that occurred, if you come down to one thing, it was distraction because, due to a merger, and rules have changed. Seniority was lost. Rules had changed. They were in the process of bidding. It's going to impact their life. What are they going to do next month? How are they going to handle this? It was all the other stuff that had nothing, but it was due to the environment. And so they were distracted by something that was concerning their livelihood, even though that bidding process was only for a month. Okay? So it enabled the crew to miss radio calls and miss, cues, significant cues that we should be landing, because they were distracted by, something that would affect their next month, i.e. a bid. Now imagine what that does to pilots who are trying to figure out what's going to happen to their life, yeah. Not just next month, their whole life. And then some of the times you get in the cockpit, we've all been around complainers, and when times are tough and you can't make ends meet, it's like you have a tendency to share your woes. Then somebody else tells you how bad their life is. And then yours is even worse. And you go back and forth. And you actually feel worse than your day started. It's like, and you can't help it. It's just like,
it's a downward spiral.
It is. And so it's really, because I've known that, I'm as I've told you, I'm on my 8th airline. And so I've been through mergers and furloughs, and I've listened to the talk. I've watched what's gone on. One of my masters is in human services, and so I have a fascination with psychology and how the mind works and why people do what they do. And I've watched this. I've watched the climate change and the environment in the cockpit and the level of distraction change when there is a pending merger, when there's a furlough, when there's some a potential strike going on. When anything happens, even the stock market, if guys are heavily invested, that's going to create a distraction, so definitely there's a lot of distraction going on with these regional pilots because they're having a hard time making ends meet.
Wow. Well, that's a good thing for folks to realize. Now, I would like to figure out what our listening audience can do, because not a lot of them out there are not pilots, but they do fly. They visit family members. They take aircraft. What can they do to help pilots out there and the industry get better?
Oh, okay. They can all go read my novels.
Yes.
And prepare for the 3rd one and be ready for the 4th. But no, on side of that, what? It's just what we need to do. We need to breathe life back into the aviation industry. It's a great career. We need to not listen to the naysayers and the negative talk. We need to, encourage our children, take them out to the museums, take them to the airport. It used to be, and it still is, such a great community event, and so get pilots, get involved in AOPA, get involved in EAA, just start supporting the industry, because what I've seen from the general aviation side is it's getting so heavily regulated and expensive. It's like not even cost effective to get into it, and so unless you're planning on a career, you really don't have the money to justify, most people don't, to just go do it as a game. And so, but I think we just need to, find the joy and the fun in it again. Yeah. And I'll tell all the listeners, if you've got any kids who are thinking about it, it's a great career. It really is. Or anyone who's just listening who thinks they want to start flying, I love it. Even, for me, after 8 airlines and all the setbacks, I still love it. So it just, my passion to try and make it better and keep it safe is one that just because something's really good doesn't mean there's not room for improvement. Yeah. And we always have to keep everybody on task, because we don't want any more Air France crashes. Yeah. We don't want that to occur. We want to keep it safe. And I've kind of feel responsible because I promoted aviation to so many young people that now I kind of feel responsible that I better keep this industry strong and safe so they have a good career, that I've talked them into going to, to living,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And when you said justify it, that kind of rubs me because I hear people say that all the time. Like my brother, early on, I took him up with me on a flight training that I had, and he sat in the back, and then later on we let him come up, and he took the stick, and he flew a little bit. But what really bothered me is I came back from the flight, and my mom was so jazzed. Oh my gosh, you have to go out and be a pilot now. It'll be amazing. And I'm like, well, hello, I've been doing this. You're not talking about me doing it. Well, my mom's like, well, that's different. You're a girl. You already have a career. You're old. You have no justifiable reason to go out and spend all this money to fly. It's a waste of money. But meanwhile, he's a young kid. He can go out and do something with it. And that kind of rubbed me the wrong way because I'm thinking, like you said, why can't you just do it for the fun of it? People go out there and do expensive hobbies like get a boat and go boating. Why not get a pilot license and become a pilot and just do it for the joy of flying?
You can. And here's the thing. There are so many groups out there that when I retire from this airline job, I am going to get a small airplane and I'm going to use my airplane to take people for introductory flights. There's people out there, incredible people that are out right now with their own aircraft and flying children and getting them from remote locations, saving their lives, flying blood. There's so many things that you can do. Actually, somebody just told me that one of his missions is he was flying for some mission that they had to go out and count horses. And so how many horses were on this reservation or something? And I'm thinking, oh, that's pretty cool. People fly blankets to, communities that don't have it. There's so many things that you can do with an airplane and a lot of good causes out there that, you can still have fun, but then you can,
also give back.
Go do something noble with it too. And why not have fun?
Yeah. Exactly. And for years and years to come, I'm thinking ahead that, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, we are thinking that there's going to be a vacuum of new pilots needed as old pilots move on and retire. And what is your thoughts on that with the excessive cost in aviation, as you mentioned? How can we build up the present pilot community?
Well, opening up and doing flying events, bringing people in, let the community see the fun of flight, getting kids, excited about it. I'll take my grandkids out to the airport, and they are so excited to see airplanes. Imagine if everyone took their kid out and locked in an airplane, something's going to spark. Those kids one day are going to go, oh, I'm going to go fly that airplane because it's a fascination to them. So it's just creating exposure, everybody, sharing the joy of flight with somebody. Getting involved in different programs, supporting the industry, basically. Yeah. And when we get this vacuum, where are we going to get new pilots? One of the things that I'd like to address, and hopefully, it's one of the things I'll plan on doing through my program, but I would like to get that regulation changed that 50% of the total time, if we need 1,500 hours, 50% of that to be in a glider. Because what's occurring right now, you can't, for all the listeners, you can't log that glider time as total flight time. And what's happening is we're getting, all these highly automated general aviation aircraft that kids who are going to fly and want to be pilots, they're learning how to fly those airplanes, and they get their ratings, and then now they're flying a glass cockpit and they're pushing buttons on an autopilot. And if they have the means, they can pay for this type of flying and get their 1,500 hours. But we're losing the stick and rudder skills set. And so I'd like to see more affordable is a glider than an aircraft. You don't have gas, go up, and if you get really good at it, you can stay up for hours. And, they're going to learn aerodynamics. And there's a lot of power in that, which is, as our industry goes, we're losing that. The old school pilots had those really good stick and runner skills and had basic aerodynamics. As the time goes on, we're getting less and less of that because the way the training is, and basically because the way our airplanes are flown. However, we can get that, and we can do it by telling the kids, telling these kids, you know what? 50% of that 1,500 hours is in a glider. What will happen is students will think, oh, I'm going to go get a glider. You know, they can start could build hours that way and get really proficient at that. Gosh, can you talk about gaining the confidence that you don't even have an engine and you can land on that runway on that spot? Mm-hmm. You know what? It'd sure be nice if Asiana knew how to do that, because I think it would have helped them. You know, they would have had that visual. Yeah. So imagine, you know, getting half your hours like that and then going into an airplane. Boy, you'd be a far better airplane flyer. And I'll tell you what, the airplane that I fly, the A330, is one of the most highly automated aircraft out there. The best pilots I fly with are those who are glider pilots or general aviation pilots. So it does port over. It does come over, and it shows in the aircraft and their abilities.
And I'm thinking flying a glider, or even I would say a tail dragger, perhaps, if that's more possible for you, would be both good ways and more inexpensive ways to keep up your proficiency and your stick and rudder skills.
Absolutely. The smaller the airplane, the better you're going to be. The smaller the airplane, the better pilot you will become, because they're more challenging to fly. The bigger they are, the more stable they are. And so the smaller the airplane you can get, and even in a tail dragger, absolutely you're going to get better piloting skills.
Wow.
So that would be one thing I recommend to all pilots anyway. Don't, you know, once you get your rating and get your license, go out and start getting some. And the airplanes are a lot cheaper. You can go rent a 150 for half the price or a third the price than you can a lot of other aircraft. Yep. And so it's very cost effective. And, you know, and you just have to get that total time up there.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's been so awesome having you out here again, Karlene, to talk about this very important topic. And before we head on out, I'd like for you to share with our audience how they can find out more about your book and you and all that jazz.
Okay, well, it's very simple. They just have to go to KarlenePetitt.com, and that's KarlenePetitt.com, and that will take them over to my blog, Flight to Success. By the way, I'm going to have my Flight to Success book out hopefully by December, and I will be back talking about that. But on my blog, you can read more about, you know, on the bar there's a bio and a little bit about each of my novels. And if they type in the search bar, my one wish for aviation, or you could even get there by one wish for aviation, that'll give them to a link of what I'm attempting to do with this career and with the writing and education and everything.
Awesome. Well, girl, you are such an inspiration to me. God bless you for all the work you do to keep aviation safe for all of us.
Well, thank you. And you are my inspiration, I have to tell you, because it takes people like you to get out there and have the courage to go out and change things. And you're doing that with what you're doing on this, you know, your radio station. So
thank you. Well, thank you, Karlene, for coming to Savvy Central Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
For your chance to win an official Savvy Central Radio 3rd Annual Aviation Month t-shirt, like our page at facebook.com/Savvy Central Radio. For those interested in joining our Savvy family or being a paid sponsor or interviewing with us, contact us at savvycentralradio@gmail.com or 718-713-2289. And remember, we want to host the programming you're interested in. If you have a guest you'd like to hear on Savvy or a topic you'd like us to cover, please let us know.